Hello, everyone. Welcome to the EO Equals webinar. It's called Employee Ownership More Than an Exit Opportunity. Thanks for tuning in today. My name is Siobhan Prophet, and I'm the Outreach and Business Development Manager at the ICA Group. We're a leading expert on worker ownership and the oldest national organization dedicated to the development of worker cooperatives and employee-owned enterprises. Just a little bit more background about who we are and the EO Equals initiative. The ICA Group is a national not-for-profit business consultant firm founded in 1977. We specialize in employee ownership. Our mission is to expand economic opportunity and self-determination by supporting initiatives that empower workers, build community assets, and root capital locally. We have helped to create dozens of worker-owned businesses, either converting traditionally owned businesses into worker-owned structures, or creating startup projects and network development projects, which we could talk more about at another time. Next slide, please. But today I have the hat on for MassCEO. The ICA Group proudly administers the Massachusetts Center for Employee Ownership. MassCEO is funded by the state of Massachusetts to provide succession planning help to business owners across the state. We also assist existing employee-owned companies, whether that's technical assistance or training. And we also partner with other service providers, communities and cities, and also state and local governments to figure out how to incorporate employee ownership into their economic development plans. Next one, please. Oh, never mind, get rid of that one. Today's conversation, maybe we go back to the title slide, is with 3 employee owners from Byggmeister, a Massachusetts-based sustainable design and construction business. I'll introduce our panel shortly. You can see our panelists on the screen here. And at the end of our conversation, we'll have a live Q&A session. You can submit your questions throughout the program using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. And when you submit a question, please include your name, where you're from. And if you're a small business owner, we'd love to hear the name of your business. And if you miss anything, don't worry, we'll be sending around the recording when it's available. So my organization, the ICA Group, is one of 4 nonprofit partners leading the EO Equals campaign, along with Evergreen Cooperatives, Nexus Community Partners, and Project Equity. With support from the Candida Fund, our organizations came together to expand the employee ownership, or EO movement, as we like to call it, helping more businesses thrive, empowering workers with higher quality jobs, and building more equitable communities. Employee ownership can take a few different forms, but it's always a business model in which the employees have an equity stake in the business, making them full or part owners. It's beneficial to the business, the employees, and the community. We often hear EO talked about as a great option for retirement, but it can benefit your business even if you're not ready to exit yet. From increasing profit margins to lowering employee turnover, EO is a great business decision. I can't think of a better way to illustrate these benefits than from learning from today's panel. As I mentioned, we're going to be joined by some of the staff of Byggmeister, the new co-owners, and also the selling owner, Paul. Byggmeister officially became employee-owned in 2021. About half of their employees became owners last year, and 2 more will become eligible for ownership by the end of 2022. We're first joined by Rachel White, CEO of Byggmeister. Rachel's relationship with Byggmeister began in 2008 when she hired the firm to renovate her house. Before the end of her project, she had signed on as a consultant, helping Byggmeister define and track sustainability standards, goals, and metrics, and she became CEO in 2018. I'm now going to pass it over to Rachel to give us an introduction to Byggmeister and their transition to worker ownership. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. It's great to be here, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation with my colleagues, Paul and Emily, in a minute. But I thought it would be really helpful to provide a little context and background for all of you participating today, just so you know who Byggmeister is, what we do, and just a brief lightning tour through our history. If you could advance to the next slide, please. So Byggmeister is a design build remodeling firm. We only work on existing homes. We occasionally do additions, but we don't do new construction. So we are focused on improving the comfort, efficiency, durability, functionality, livability of existing homes. I just captured a screenshot here of our website that we actually rolled out about 1.5 years ago. We are a mission driven business with a strong commitment to stewardship. We're striving to be exemplary stewards of existing homes, or as we also like to say, to preserve and adapt existing homes to help them meet the challenges of the 21st century. We've been in business for a long time, coming up on our 40th anniversary next year. We're currently doing about $4.5 million annually in sales. We also strongly commit to identify ourselves as committed to the triple bottom line: people, planet, and profit. And as Siobhan mentioned in the introduction, we completed our conversion to worker ownership in 2021. Next slide. I just wanted to show you a couple of our recent projects, just to give you a sense of what we do all day. It's in Richard Scarry's book, What Do Busy People Do All Day? We're very busy people at Byggmeister, doing renovation and small addition projects. This project on the top left is a small addition that we completed this past year. Top right, a kitchen renovation as part of a kind of first floor renovation of an entire first floor, as well as improvements to the building envelope, insulating and transitioning off of fossil fuels to heat pumps for heating and cooling. Bottom right is a third floor that we actually had been finished prior to our working on the house, but finished poorly, uninsulated and finished poorly and cold. And we took the finishes down, re-insulated, and created this lovely kid's bedroom up there. You can see also a little heat pump. This part of this project was also a partial conversion to heat pumps. And then another project in the lower left as well was a small primary bedroom suite addition, as well as some energy upgrades. All of our projects involve where we really focus our niches and improving home performance. So this just gives you a little sense of what we do with ourselves all day. Next slide, please. I want to walk you through just the highlights, some of the highlights of our history, which you can find also on our website. As I mentioned earlier, Paul will be joining us in a moment. Paul Eldrenkamp founded the company 39 years ago. In 1987, we joined what is, I would consider still our most important professional association, which is the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association for high performance building practitioners, architects, builders, engineers. Another important milestone, I think, in the life of any small business is when the business, or in many small businesses, is when the business moves out of the founder and owner's house. And that happened for us in the mid-90s. For us, a big transition point was also when we went from a build only, remodeling only, to design build, hired our first in-house architect. In 2009, we began to really focus in on sustainability and really become much more focused on our stewardship mission. 2014, so almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago now, Paul announced his intention to retire. He gave us 10 years notice, which at the time seemed like a lot of time, but it actually took us, as you see, until last year, 2021, when we became a worker cooperative. We transitioned leadership of the company in between there, between Paul's announcement of his intention to retire and the transition to worker ownership. So I became the CEO in 2018. And then as of May 31st, Paul has officially retired from business, from working at Byggmeister. So he stayed on with us as an employee for the better part of the year. Next slide. And last slide. This is us on the day that we gathered. This is in the backyard of my house to celebrate our conversion to worker ownership. We actually have had one new hire since then, and there's one member of our team who wasn't able to join us this day. So it's not quite all of us, but just who we are. As I think Siobhan mentioned in her introduction, when we converted, there were 7 folks who were eligible for ownership. And there'll be a couple more who become eligible over the course of this year. 6 of us are identify as women, 8 as men. We have a really broad range of ages from 20s to mid 60s. We also have a very broad range of educational backgrounds, from folks who have completed high school all the way up to postgraduate degrees. Tenure ranges from the newest employee in this photo, maybe not in this photo, but recently we have somebody who just joined us less than a month ago, and we have folks who've been with us for more than 20 years. We have a 4-person management team, and together we've been working at the company for for approximately 80 years. So that's just a little bit about who we are today. And I think now that's the end of my introduction to Byggmeister. I think we'll move into the discussion.
Thank you for that overview, Rachel. I'm excited to pull in some more voices from Byggmeister. We have Paul Eldrenkamp and Emily Sills. Paul founded Byggmeister in 1983 with the goal for the company to be an exemplary steward of existing homes. Paul is now a consultant for Helm Construction Solutions, whose purpose is to revolutionize the construction industry, centering the triple bottom line principles of planet, people, and prosperity. Emily Sills is a worker owner and carpenter at Byggmeister. Emily joined the company in 2018 after completing the carpentry program at the North Bennett Street School in Boston. Emily is spearheading Byggmeister's effort to obtain a JUST label, a nutrition label for socially just and equitable organizations, from the International Living Futures Institute, which I also believe is an organization that governs living building challenges. And that's a very exciting accomplishment, guys. Paul and Emily, thank you for joining us.
Great to be here.
All right, and now we do have some questions for you. The folks in the audience, please feel free to pop your questions into the chat and we'll add those in. We have plenty of time today. It's only 1:15 and we've got until 2. We can dig in. So just for the group, why did Byggmeister choose the path of employee ownership?
Should I field that one?
I think you should start with why, what made you consider it?
Well, of the options available, one was to identify an outside buyer. Another was to identify a small group of employees, 1 or 2 or 3 to buy. And the third was to open it up to all employees, convert to worker ownership. And there were 2 reasons, 2 categories why I gravitated towards the employee ownership. One was practical. It made the most business sense. It seemed the most likely pathway to success, in large part because of the positive feedback loop that would occur, that as the team developed the confidence in themselves, they could run the business. They would also develop the reality that they could run the business. I knew all along that they had it in them, but they had to, a little bit like the Wizard of Oz, they had to learn themselves that they could do it. And it just seemed like the pathway that was going to be not only the most satisfying, but also the most successful. There was also certainly an idealistic reason for it. I've long known that the way to motivate people is through voice and autonomy and empowerment, and employee ownership is definitely a tool towards a very important tool towards greater economic empowerment. I also believe that that cooperative ownership is an important opportunity for people to learn to have the conversations that we seem less and less able to have in this country. The sorts of difficult conversations, conversations about shared futures, the sorts of conversations that the sociologist Robert Putnam bemoans the loss of in worker-owned co-ops thrive on, in fact. And so that was another important motivation for moving in this direction.
Maybe it's a good time to have some questions in the chat, like how exactly does a transition to worker ownership work? And that's a larger discussion, but we would love to hear, like, how did the transition process work at Byggmeister?
Oh, maybe I'll start, and then Emily, you can fill in. So, as I said in the giving a little bit of the history, Paul let everybody in the company know publicly in 2014 that he wanted to retire, and it was 10 years, that was the time frame, planned to retire in 10 years. At that point, I don't think you had, Paul, I don't recall that Paul had clearly identified employee ownership as the path forward, but put it out there for people to start thinking about and talking about, and charting our own collective future. I think we got in terms of the nuts and bolts and the mechanics, once it became clear that there was interest in converting to worker ownership, we started working with, I can't remember what year it was, with the ICA group to kind of help us shepherd, explore, and then shepherd through the process, as well as completing some of the valuation of the company, helping us with bylaws once we got to that point. But it was really a process of, I guess, initially started as sort of open-ended conversation, exploration, individual pondering and consideration, that then moved into, I guess, ever more practical and detailed discussions as it became clear we would work through one thing, and it became clear, yes, there's continued forward momentum. This is something that people still want to explore, and we would take it a little bit further. And I see Emily nodding, so it sounds like maybe that reflects your experience as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say that one of the things that struck me was it wasn't that, oh, we converted and now we have to figure everything out. There was this whole, by the time we actually converted to employee ownership, it almost felt like an afterthought, because we'd done so much legwork already in terms of figuring out what we wanted that to look like and what the structure was going to be, and that kind of thing.
It's a shared process of discovery. It was helped along with the loose framework provided by the ICA group. But then, as Emily said, once we got to the end, it was almost an afterthought. It's the way we think of when we get to the end of a project planning process and we sign an agreement for construction. It's a formality, because all of the discovery, the discussion, the pinning, it's very similar to planning a renovation project. I'm sure people in other businesses could find their analogies to their line of work. But
you say more, you mentioned that going through the process of the conversion, like, prompted you and like made it by necessity that you had to do some internal work, whether that is on, their operations, or was it work on your culture? Could you say more about what it caused you to have to work on?
Emily, you want to start with that, and then
I can try. So because I joined the company in the middle of this process already happening, there's a lot of things that I just assume, oh, that's how Byggmeister is, that may not have always been the case. But I guess the things that felt sort of co-op-esque that we were doing, as I started, were things like seeing all of the financial info that got shared at all company meetings, and really making sure that everyone, right down to me, who was a brand new, apprentice carpenter, like, understood what all of the financial documents meant and that kind of thing. Yeah, I guess, some of it if Rachel or Paul, you can probably speak more to this, but sort of the culture of everybody's opinion matters, and making sure that not just that we're taking a vote and whatever the majority says, but making sure that we really understand if anybody disagrees, why is that, and can we, is that something we can address? It felt much more collaborative, I think is what I'm getting at. And I don't know if that's always been true or if we leaned into that harder.
Paul, do you think that's always been true?
Of course, I always think it's been true because I'm the owner, and the owner of a small business always thinks it's a collaborative culture. But I mean, we had to learn how to make it a truly collaborative culture. I think in the early days, when you put out the idea of employee ownership, of ownership transition, employee ownership, people, it's by its very nature, starting conversations like that are starting conversations where people are filling in the details of what that means very differently. And the conversations over the course of the ensuing years had to do with speaking out loud how we had filled in the details, comparing them, and then reconciling them where needed or building on them as possible. We definitely had a culture in place, in particular as a design build company, of taking a very team-oriented approach to problem solving. And I think that was a terrific foundation. We also learned, to Siobhan, this is going to sound pretty rudimentary, but to me it was revelatory. We learned the very important distinctions between the sorts of decisions and authority that exist at the ownership level, the governance level, and the management of day-to-day operations level. And I would say most of the conversation was sorting those distinctions out. And that was as much that was as much reassuring as it was challenging. Reassuring in that people were able to see just how much was going to stay the same. I mean, we had operations down. Our operations was very high functioning, and for that reason, we weren't really going to change anything at the operational level. It's just going to be at the ownership and the governance level, and those were the more fun conversations anyway.
Yeah, I would just add to that that a key, what happened in the middle, because Paul was retiring, for us was this transition of leadership. And that's a really big piece that you need to, any business that's going through transition needs to think about is the leadership of the company, whether it's you can't, it's not that that's not an issue when you transition to employee ownership, right? That's the governance doesn't, shared ownership doesn't address leadership, and it also doesn't address management. So I guess I'm echoing on that, but also it's something it's its own thing that needs to be worked through as part of the conversion to ownership. As if the owner is retiring, if the owner is not retiring, it could look different. But in terms of the life cycle of where we were, Paul was exiting the company, we had to address leadership and ownership. They happened overlapping, I guess I would say.
Questions in the chat wanting to know more about the nuts and bolts about how does the ownership structure at Byggmeister work? If you could tell us a little bit more about that. We have one question asking, how long does an employee have to be a part of your company before they can be considered for ownership there? And is there a buy-in? So if you could just tell us about the nuts and bolts of how ownership works at Byggmeister.
Who would like to field that?
I nominate Emily because she's been in the middle of it.
I was going to nominate Rachel, maybe between the two of us. So it's, in order to be eligible, it's 3 years and 3,000 hours. Is that right? Those are the numbers?
6,000.
And so, if you're full-time, that amounts to 3 years. If you're part-time, it is more than 3 years. and 3 years and 3,000 hours. There is a buy-in. I'm blanking on what the total was, but there's a chunk of it that you I know that was a long conversation, but that was a while ago. There's a chunk of it that you pay right up front when you decide to become an owner, and then the rest of it most of us chose to do as deductions out of payroll until you've met the rest of it. And the process for joining for the initial group of us was it depends on how you count it. Actually, because this is the, by the time we signed the papers, it felt like an afterthought. So for the group of us who were the initial group, it's that years of meeting with everybody to have conversations and hash it all out. And then at the end, it's just signing the paperwork and paying your initial buy-in. But then for the next folks who come in, there's a process that involves learning about how employee ownership works, what the responsibilities are, what the power structure looks like making sure that you've had a chance to really understand that and ask questions and that kind of thing. And then there's, at the point you become eligible, there's a vote from the other existing members.
Yeah, it's 6,000. It's 3 years and 6,000 hours. So it's and $6,000 is the buy-in. And somebody I see,
and I think it was 500 upfront initially.
That's correct.
That right?
You have to, when you sign your membership agreement, you have to put down at least $500. And I see some questions coming in about whether we considered an ESOP, and the answer is no. It didn't seem like that structure is more appropriate for a larger organization with a higher annual sales volume than what we have, and so we never considered it very carefully for that reason. We were advised that as a smaller organization, it's not as appropriate, and the tax burdens and administrative burdens are more, don't make sense for an organization of our size.
We typically say that a good rule of thumb is 5 million plus in revenue and 50 or more employees is a good chance that it's a better fit for an ESOP. But there's lots of considerations that go in there as well. And ESOPs are they are a retirement plan. Are there other values that you would like to see in your succession going beyond? Yes, profit sharing in a retirement plan is great. Some companies, there's a solar company called Namaste Solar in Arizona that incorporated a democratic governance with an ESOP structure. So depending on the size of a company, we can certainly, there is an employee ownership model that can work for the goals and the size of the company. Going back, I think, there's a lot of questions here. I'm going to need a little time to sort through the questions in the chat. Thanks for being so engaged, everybody. And maybe we could pull it back towards Emily. We were just talking about membership requirements and buy-in fees, and that's just one small part of becoming an owner. I just wanted to know if you can tell us more about why did you decide to become an employee owner, and what has that experience been like for you so far?
A couple of reasons. One is that it it really matters to me to have that voice, and that some influence in what my job looks like. I'm someone who's gonna be pretty invested in my job no matter what, but being able to also feel like I have some control over what my what my work day looks like, what the work culture looks like, and that's important to me. It's something I've grown up with. My family was part of a food co-op. I went to a cooperative school for a while. Those are very familiar values to me, and so for that piece of it for me personally was important. And I think even some of my coworkers who didn't necessarily grow up with that, I see a lot of people taking a real pride in being able to have that level of involvement. So there's that piece of it. There's also this is a company that I want to work with for a long time. And so it makes sense to buy in and be part of that ownership structure. And there's the practical financial piece of it as well, that is not insignificant, that, knowing that being an owner comes with getting some additional money sort of further down the road. Like that's not small. That's also important to me. So, and I guess the other piece of it is that by the time I actually needed to make that decision, I had seen us have hard conversations, work through decisions that had to be made as a large group that were not easy to make as a large group. And I had also seen us, trust smaller subsets of Byggmeister to make some of those decisions as well. So I'd seen sort of, I'd seen us be able to like delegate decisions and also come together as a big group and make decisions and do both of those well, even when it wasn't easy. And so I think that combination of things made me go, yeah, this is something I want to do with this group of people. So
I would just pick up where, if that's all right, Siobhan, and answer that question for myself and pick up where Emily left off. And also something that Paul mentioned early on in respect, I can't remember what the question was that you asked him, but I realized that I wanted to be an owner of Byggmeister as part of, during the process of, exploring it, right, was that I learned that I wanted to do it. It's not something that I had an answer to at the outset, that it's something that the answer emerged as we worked through the transition. Philosophically, I would say, similarly to what Paul said, there were sort of philosophical reasons why I support the structure, but the question as to whether it would work for me whether I felt it would work for Byggmeister and work for me personally, particularly in my role as the leader of a now democratically governed organization, and how that would work was something I had to sort of experience, and we had to practice to see if it would work. And similarly to what Emily said, is I realized that it did through the act of trying it out and trying it on, and realized that it did work.
Great. Has Byggmeister changed as a result of the ownership transition? And if so, how? And how has it stayed the same?
I love that question.
I think that's for you, Rachel.
I would also love to hear what Paul thinks too. But I'll take a crack at it. I see the transition to worker ownership as an evolution of who we are as a company, as a deepening of our commitment to transparency, to collaborative problem solving that grows out of the culture and the mode of operations that Paul had set in place almost 40 years ago, and that had, evolved over time. And so I do think, in a way, this model, this structure, this ownership structure, and the democratic governance model, it wasn't sort of an imposition from the outside into who we are, but really felt like a natural outgrowth of who we were. So in that respect, it does, certainly there have been changes, and moving from a single owner to collective ownership, even transferring, we did not have a management team, for example, for a long time until we started talking about the transitioning leadership to me. So that was a change. So certainly things changed, but I would say they were smaller incremental changes, and maybe the realizing of certain potential that was there before but hadn't been fully acted on, rather than something dramatic. I'm curious though, Paul, from your perspective, how it feels to you about what's changed and what's stayed the same.
It is a good question. The company, this is not false modesty. The company is better managed than I could ever imagine. having been able to do on my own. One quantifiable indicator of that is I stopped participating on the management team, I believe in 2018, something like that. And we set the valuation of the company, and there was a question about that. We can dig into that a bit more if we have time. But sometime around then, we set the valuation of the company. And as soon as I stepped away from management, the valuation increased steadily. And some of that has to do with the fact, yes, we're in a boom economy, but we've been in a boom economy for a while. But just the fact is, the company became more reliably profitable and better run. And why did that happen? I think it's because it happened for a number of reasons. One, the extraordinary talent on the management team. But I think it also happened because this transition forced me to take practices, habits, and aspirations out of my head and into the organization. And they were able to, they were more able to flourish in the organization than they ever had been able to when they were just stuck in my head, basically. So, forcing me to create outside myself the sort of organization that I had always dreamed of helped make that organization real and possible. It was just a fascinating process. And, this is probably a good time to caution the audience that the gloss we put on things, this is what history happens with history. The interpretations and glosses you put onto things that happened in the past are different from how it felt at the time. So, I always have, when telling the story of our transition, I always have to be careful to warn people about that. I always have to be careful to remind myself. It probably didn't feel that clean or logical at the time, but in retrospect, that's certainly what happened.
Combine some questions here from the chat. We had some questions about how do you train your staff to participate in running the worker cooperative and doing things like understanding financials and being able to participate in making business decisions like that. Is there training or what kind of systems are in place to facilitate that at Byggmeister?
Well, I think there are two levels of that. I mean, Emily took it. We have developed a framework for sort of a path to ownership framework that we're still in the early stages of. Everyone who's an owner now is somebody who went through the transition process, right? Which it was a good training ground in and of itself. So for future owners, we're developing, people who come on and are new hires, 3-year path to ownership that involves having a mentor and things like that. In harkening back to your last question about what changed and what stayed the same. So everybody, and Emily mentioned this too, from the time they join the company, are looking at the company's financials at our all company meetings, for example. So there are ways in which we are exposing people to operations, to aspects of the business that are outside of their, day-to-day from their first day on the job. And that was a long-standing practice at Byggmeister that we're just continuing. We're inviting people to join other sort of more operational or systems initiatives, like the Just initiative that Emily has been working on. So we try to provide those opportunities for people to get involved outside of their, initiatives that are outside of their day-to-day work. And as Paul mentioned earlier, we've always been a very an organization that relies on collaborative problem solving because of the kind of work that we do. And so that training is sort of happening I wouldn't say it's in the air we breathe, but in a way it is part of how we operate. I don't know, Emily, would you elaborate or add to that at all?
But I have much to add to that. I think one of the things that we did have to actively work on and probably still do is encouraging people to speak up at meetings. I think that definitely comes more naturally to some of us than others. And speaking up when like for field crews, speaking up when there's a problem on the job site and you're trying to figure out how to fix it, that feels very different than speaking up in a meeting setting. And so I think that is something that we will need to explicitly encourage. Yeah.
Thank you. I see a lot of questions coming in, wanting to know more about the dollars and cents of an employee ownership transition. Folks would like to know, let's see, was the deal financed? Paul, do you feel like you got a fair market value for your business? And how did the actual purchase of the company work?
Let me, I'll start, and then Rachel and Emily can fill in some, fill in details I miss or add their perspective. I started off with a dollar figure that I wanted from the overall deal, so how did I come up with that dollar figure? My wife and I met with a retirement planner and pinned down some numbers. And I definitely recommend that for anybody at any point in their career. I'm also incredibly lucky in that the woman I married is an amazing steward of our household financial resources. She's a terrific planner. So my first bit of advice is to, if you can, find a domestic partner who's an extraordinary steward of your household financial resources, because that will open up a lot of options. And when it comes time for an owner, if you're an owner who's considering employee ownership, it's nice to have some options and flexibility. It takes pressure off if there's not if there's not a big number that you have to get out of the deal to fund your retirement. Try not to get yourself in that position, and start early in your career on that. So that being said, I was able to come up with a number that I wanted to get out of the deal. And some of it could be in salary, and some of it could be in purchase price of the company. And we settled on a split between salary and purchase price of the company. The salary was going to be for the last few years. And I was going to basically continue to get my salary up to the point of conversion to the worker ownership conversion, the purchase of the business. And that both provided some flexibility and some challenges. The flexibility it provided is that the team could use me in any way they saw fit. They were paying me anyway, so they could use me more or use me less. Fortunately, they needed me less and less. Unfortunately, I kept getting paid the CEO salary, even though they needed me less. The good news there is that it meant that the company had to remain profitable. And it also meant that once they stopped paying me that salary, they were even more profitable. And in fact, they have been able to pay off the loan overall at a more aggressive rate. They've been able to essentially accelerate payments. So there was a note. I am the bank. They are paying me directly. I did not ask them to borrow from a bank and pay me the lump sum. I agreed to be the bank. That was also, for philosophical, idealistic reasons. I wanted it to succeed, and I knew that I would be more willing to work with them than a bank would be. So Well, let me just leave it there and see if Rachel and Emily have details they want to fill in or think I missed something on that.
I would say from so one thing you left out, which I think is important, is that happily there was good
That's right.
alignment between the business valuation and what Paul needed to retire. And so that made things easier. It was also what Paul was putting on the table on his end was very generous and very fair. I think if we had to, if there had been not good alignment between the valuation and what Paul needed, if we would have had to go to a bank, if it was not clear that we could afford this, given kind of current operations, right? This was not a stretch for us to be able to afford what the business was worth. Of course, those things, the valuation is very closely tied to the profitability over the last few years. So there was a nice correlation there between that and what Paul needed. So it was very doable. And we knew that. And that made all the difference.
Yes, it was a happy coincidence that that there was alignment between the valuation and what I was asking for. In fact, I believe that it was even happier in that what I was asking for was at the lower end of the valuation at the time. And as I alluded to earlier, it was particularly interesting to see the valuation increase beyond that after we had set the dollar value, because to me that was a sign of, okay, this is really working.
I want to chime in that this case with Paul being able and willing to offer 100% seller financing is certainly makes employee ownership more streamlined in terms of, hey, we eliminate a bank, but Paul had that confidence and had the revenue numbers and projections in front of his eyes to make him confident and be in holding that note for the company. But the majority of not only employee ownership transitions, but business sales in general do involve some level of seller financing, but also bank financing. And important to note that there are lenders across the country that are interested in funding these types of cooperative conversion projects and will do so in a way that is not dependent upon the personal finances of the worker owners themselves. That's an important piece there. I know there's some questions in here about what resources are available to help people complete these transitions, and mission-driven lenders are certainly one of them. Let's see. Just going through in here, but before I jump back into chat questions, I'm wondering if we could touch on the benefits of being employee-owned in the construction industry in particular.
I hadn't given that one much thought. Emily, what do you think?
That's a good question. I mean, just to take a stab at it, one piece of it is that since we're spread out across a bunch of job sites, it's kind of useful that now, everyone who's an owner has a little bit more of a stake in things going well, because we all are the kind of people who are pretty invested anyway. Like that was already true to some extent, but there are definitely sometimes moments where I'm, making a decision about whether to make something more efficient or, whether to, which I'm thinking and talking at the same time. It adds some extra weight to wanting things to go well, because it matters in a more concrete way than it did before. And having that spread out across people on every job site is, I mean, that might give us a little bit more of a push to do well. I don't know. What do you think?
That's a great answer. I was really, I was spinning my wheels on that one, but I do think the fact that we're a distributed workforce spread out over, and we're also working in people's homes, which is really high stakes. And the fact that that ownership is broadly shared among, people who they're, you kind of, we're going to get to the point where there'll be an owner on every job site, probably at all times, right? Soon, maybe we're not there quite yet, but we will get there, and that's a nice thing. It's a
I
really
think
nice
the
thing.
clients like it too. Like it's sort of,
Oh yeah, our
it's
clients are
got
super.
a warm, like a warm fuzzy feel good effect also.
It's sort of the culmination of our commitment to the triple bottom lines. It's a really concrete, and people tend to hire us for our commitment to sustainability and to equity, and or that's a big piece of why they hire us. It's not something they don't care about, so it does reinforce their sense of connection and wanting to work with us and trusting us.
I do. This is a useful time for me to bring in my dual perspective here, not only having been in the middle of a transition at my own company, but also as a consultant to other design and construction companies. And employee ownership is not a panacea. I mean, I think everybody realizes that, but it's an amplifier. I think if you're a highly functioning company, there's a chance it's going to make you an even higher functioning company. If you're a marginally or low functioning company, it's going to be a disaster. And it's going to be a disaster, not just internally, but it's going to be a disaster for your clients. So it is the mere fact of being employee owned is not the deciding factor on whether it's an advantage for a construction company to be so. So I just need to put that out there. If you're going to do this, do it well, or
make sure you're high functioning. I mean, that's the piece
yeah.
of the letting us know of your intention to retire in 2014. And we were a very high functioning organization at that point, but there were still some key pieces of operations that you held that needed time to transfer. Probably the biggest one was sales. And project development and business development, and the front-facing leadership of the company had not been transferred at that point. And that takes time, in addition to getting, a team of people looking at the finances, which was not, people were looking at them at company meetings, but that level of really tracking business performance very closely. So I'm just repeating and extending on that it was really about being a very functional organization that is what enables employee ownership to be such a positive amplifier.
Yeah, it's a lot of work. And so people need to already care and want to do it. Like it was a lot of boring meetings to sit through and make yourself care about.
It's not that way. It's really not. I feel like that's that way now.
But like, do you remember in the middle of hashing out the bylaws, just how miserable some of, you get halfway through that, and like we felt accomplished at the end of it because we'd done all those things, but in the middle of it, like wading through all of the legal stuff was not what I would call fun. Like it was important, but it was not fun.
No, it's true. It's what Paul said, and trying to put ourselves back in the middle of it, things look very different. There's a rosy hue on everything from this end, and there were boring, frustrating moments along the way.
And I not to beat a dead horse on this, but probably in my life, probably 2 or 3 times a month, I talk to a small business owner, small construction or design business owner who says, I hate owning a business. I want to convert to a worker-owned co-op so that other people have to own this thing with me. That's not good. That's not the basis for success. You got to be already having fun at what you're doing and enjoy working with the people around you. And you need to be, the way I frequently put it is your business needs to be very much in fire prevention mode rather than firefighting mode. And that's when you start, I think, if it's an existing business, that's when you start talking about employee ownership, and not until then.
This was wonderful spending time with everyone today. I really appreciate the candid nature we have going on here in the group today. All right, so just trying to choose another question from the chat, and we are going to wrap it up shortly. Were there any barriers or hurdles that you faced through this process? And if there were, how did you get through them and what did you learn?
Can I speak to that? This is something that Rachel and I have talked about a lot, and it's I'm still not quite sure how to talk about it because it was touchy at the time, and we did have this collaborative atmosphere. I was clearly in charge though, and I had long-term relationships with a lot of very loyal employees, and for this to work, I needed basically to pick one of those loyal employees to be the CEO. And that was an uncomfortable process. And I did not handle it all that well in retrospect. Rachel had to keep, I shouldn't put it this way, Rachel had to remind me more than was fair to her about how inadequately I was grappling with that. So I just want to put that out there as something that people need to think about and need to be able to, some people, I mean, not everyone necessarily is going to be in that situation, but that was, how do you have a cooperative and still have one clear leader? And I really believe that there needs to be one clear leader. My experience is that as soon as you putting more than one person in charge of something is the same as putting no one in charge of it in general. So how do you have a collaborative atmosphere? How do you pitch the cooperative ownership and at the same time choose one person to basically take your place as that front-facing CEO type? It's not necessarily going to be an easy transition or an easy conversation. So spend a lot of time with that is my advice.
Question about just searching for resources and funding to help business owners think about this. We're in Massachusetts. We're very lucky to be in a state that puts funding that helps business owners explore succession planning and employee ownership options free of charge. And there's some exciting legislation coming down the corner if anyone interested to also increase these resources that we have here. But if you're in different states, you can certainly reach out to partners of the EO Equals campaign. And there are an increasing number, exponential increase actually, in the state employee ownership centers. There very well could be one in your state. And if there isn't, we could certainly help connect you with a service provider that could help you explore these options. And being at the top of the hour, it's 2 o'clock. Thank you everyone for spending your afternoon with us. This brings us to the end of our program today. We hope you learned something new about employee ownership and can see how it's so much more than an exit opportunity. EO can truly improve your business, the lives of your employees and your community. And if you're interested in learning more about EO, please visit employeeownershipequals.org. You'll find information on the different types of EO. There's great case studies and resources and worksheets on there from other businesses like Byggmeister. And you can even sign up to speak with an EO expert. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you had some value and have a great rest of your day.